welcome to Creative Momentum with Meg. Sam, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yes, thank you, Meg. My name is Samantha Lee. I am a writer. I've just had my debut novel Bound come out. That came out in at the start of March. So yeah, that's been my main art form, and I also write poetry and essays.
Excellent. How long have you been a writer for?
Probably about 10 years, a bit over 10 years maybe. And it's something that, as a child, I always wanted to do it, but it's just something that you never thought, like, that's not a job you can actually do.
That
And
sounds
yes,
familiar.
yeah, and also it was like, well, you need to not think about it as a job either, is the other thing, because realistically, it's very hard to make money from your writing anyway. But I think even that confidence just to have it as a hobby, to say, oh, I'm a writer, is, that's a huge step.
Mm.
And when I actually first started writing Bound, it was actually because, well, I'm an English teacher by trade, and it was my very first year teaching Extension 2 English. And they actually have to write about a 5,000 word major work, a short story. And I was thinking, how can I expect my students to write a 5,000 word story when I actually have not done that myself? And I can't do that. So that's kind of what got me going, okay, I need to actually write as opposed to think about it.
Oh, I love that way into it as well. Because it is easy. Like I've run a lot of workshops. It's easy to
Mm.
set it, but can you do it yourself?
Well, that's
Uh,
right. Something that I'd be sending all these tasks. I'm like, actually, like, is this actually a good task? I don't know. This could actually be terrible.
Sam, can you tell me what your routine is? Are you still teaching? Are you writing full time? What is your creative routine?
Okay, so great questions. So I'm not technically teaching right now. I do bits and pieces of other things. So it's a long story with what's happened in my career, but now I kind of consult rather than actually teaching, which is, really quite nice for me. And as well as that, I have picked up things like, since I've become an author, I picked up things like running writer workshops, which has been amazing. I absolutely love that because I feel like I've still got one foot in the classroom. But as well as that, a bit more creative space. And without, I think that, teaching is a different story, but I think that that had come to an end. It might be something I go back to, but who knows? At the moment, my writing is the whole idea is that I start at 5 a.m. Every day. Now, this was something that I started a decade ago while I was teaching because that was the only time I had to, well, the only time I had to write. Since then, I've had children. So you think you've got from 5 a.m., but they could wake up at 4:30.
Yeah.
And in which case you don't have that time to write. So I try to wake up at 5, but I guess I'm not as strict with myself. Like since then I've given myself a lot of grace. And obviously sometimes it's more important for me to do that, but other times it's like, well, you haven't had a full night's sleep. You need to prioritize that sometimes. But ideally, I'm at 5, I'm up most mornings at 5 a.m. writing. And then I go until the kids get up, get them all ready. I don't really have time during the day to write, unfortunately. That was the whole idea when I started kind of this year. I was like, I'll have a whole day to write. Well, even last year I was thinking that. But I've ended up picking up more work here and there. So, I've got 2 days of work that has been pretty consistent because I've just kept getting more work, which is wonderful. But it does make it hard because I'm also finding to engage with the creative process for me, I feel like I need to be like tapping in every single day for it to actually to feel connected to my writing.
Mm, mm. So you're finding now that you aren't able to tap into it every day. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So
Yeah.
I guess time restrictions. I haven't been able to tap into it every single day. I think my goal, like my realistic goal is like at least 3 times a week. A stretch goal is probably every single day. Um, but probably a realistic stretch goal is 5 days a week. And that's doable most weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All the mums out there are just like nodding their heads,
Yeah.
going, "Yeah,
Yeah. And, my kids are still fairly young, so I'm hoping that as they get a bit older and more independent and maybe when I'm doing the drop off to sport, I can sit in the car as opposed to standing there chasing around my toddler um,
yeah,
and trying to watch my child. I can sit in the car and do some writing, hopefully, is the idea.
yeah, yeah." Well, it's all the seasons,
Yes.
it's constantly changing, and that's what
Yeah.
makes life interesting. Tell
That's
me,
right.
do you have a process to go from the seed of an idea to doing, getting that complete body of work?
Yeah, so I think that like a lot of the times I start with the concept, and it's interesting because that's, teaching at Social 2 English. It's always like, what's your concept? And it's funny though, because I feel like most writers actually don't generally start with that. Whereas I've got this big idea and I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to show this through a narrative or through an essay or through a poem? And that's kind of how I start. Now, in terms of my novel, I kind of had a very clear picture of the start and the end. I didn't really know how I was going to get there. I mean, to keep in mind, it actually evolved into a novel. Originally, it was just going to be a short story, and then it was going to be a series of short stories from different generations that all weaved together. But instead, it ended up being this one continuous thing because I couldn't let it go. Um, so I think that I kind of have. I think Catherine Hayman describes it as, having a clothing line. You've got pegs of like kind of where you want to get to. It doesn't really matter how you get there. You just kind of get to the pegs. And then, I had a clear idea of how I wanted to finish and, it ended up there. But it was, we took a really windy route to get there. And with that, certainly, the pegs definitely change and rearrange themselves and need to, be taken off at times and put back on in a different form. So there was a lot of that. So I guess I'm a bit of a pantser. I would love to be a plotter, and I keep like this, I keep saying this time I'm going to plot, but my mind doesn't work that way, and I really want it to, because I feel like it takes me a lot more revisions to get to that final product. So like the structural edit, in my novel needed such a heavy structural edit because it was just me wandering around on a page.
Mm. I'm nodding quite strongly because I'm that pantser too,
Okay.
and I wish I could plot more because I think it would take
Yes.
a lot less drafts, but it's
Yeah,
not.
completely.
It's not the way my brain works.
That's right.
So,
And also, like, there were some times where, I didn't know what was going to happen and the characters wrote it for me. Like, it just,
mm,
and that's a wonderful feeling. And I love to chase that feeling in a way. So part of me, like, my mind loves to follow them and kind of see where it takes me. Like, there's something so much fun about creating a world and having the story, chasing that story.
and I think that's why we stay pantsing
Yes,
because
that's right.
honestly, that's what we all love.
That's right.
It's when that character's talking to you and takes you down a path that you didn't even know
Yeah,
existed. So
completely.
and I think plotters, I don't know, like what, how do they do that?
Don't know. And also, like, what's with the spreadsheets? I don't understand them. If
I'm a
you-
spreadsheeter, but I'm a pantser spreadsheeter. So
Okay, maybe
fill it
that's
in as
what
I
I need.
go.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. And maybe that's what I need to move forward to thinking like, but yeah, I don't know, I can't do the numbers of it. Like, I can't do the math. Like, people are like, at this point, 75% in this needs to happen. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, how do you figure that out?
Yeah. I love the idea of the line with the pegs on it.
Yeah,
And one of the manuscripts I've written, I called it my skeleton. Like I
yeah,
had a skeleton with some bones on it, and I had to build the
yes,
flesh around it. Can
yeah.
you tell me what inspires your creative work? Uh, you know, from the world around you, from people, from writers.
Yeah.
Where do you
So
get your inspiration?
yeah, I think I get it mostly from the world around me. It's, so for instance, Bound was very much inspired by, it was a story that my mother told me. And it was an auntie in her village in Malaysia. And keep in mind, they call everyone auntie and uncle, so it wasn't a blood relation. But it was a story of a woman who had her feet bound, and then the laws in China, sorry, and then the laws changed, and her feet were unbound at the last moment. And she was, yeah, she was the last, the first woman in her family to have unbound feet. And I was like, what do you mean, mom? Like, and I just had to keep following this story. I was like, please, I need the pieces of this story and I need to put it together myself if you're not going to tell me. And, a lot of it was fictionalized as well. And, there were elements of my mother's story. So my mother also had these really captivating stories of her childhood, often, traumatic. But, I couldn't, for me, it was also about finding out a truth to it as well. I think, even though it's fictionalized, there's very much like have these images of people in our families' lives that are people who I didn't necessarily know that well. And I can't help but go, well, I can't, but you cannot tell me that they were just a bad person. Like, why? Like, what was it that made them that way? And I think for me, it's always about curiosity. And I'm like, but why? But why? But why? And that's kind of why I write. So that was with my novel. Poetry, it's often my poems are about motherhood. So for me, it was just about kind of, and being a woman of color and a mother, because unfortunately in the stories of motherhood, a lot of the time it's a very white perspective of motherhood, and it's also really idolized. And part of me was like, wait, it's so idolized, but I don't even look like what's like, I can't ever look like what's presented as the ideal mother. And so that was kind of going through my mind on top of the actual struggles of motherhood as well. So that was kind of the intersection of motherhood and all of that. That's kind of how I got into poetry. And then I think with the essay that I wrote that got published, that was actually another, basically the English syllabus changed and I had to write in different forms. And I was like, okay, I need to get my head around this. So I'm just going to write this. But it actually, that's about, power dynamics and, I originally wanted it to be called Don't Yuck My Yum, but they didn't like that title. It was, I think it's called How It Feels When People Scrunch Up Their Face at Chinese Food. And it's very much about, you know, if you can scrunch up your face at certain foods, that means that there's some sort of power dynamics that some cultural foods are seen as lesser than others to do with colonial perspectives and all the rest, right? So that was kind of where that was going. And it kind of just became this angry rant. And so I guess I had all these kind of things that I've been thinking about the world and feelings I didn't even realize that I had. And it kind of, it was originally meant to be discursive and just discussion, but it just became more persuasive as I kept going. So it kind of sits somewhere between there. And, thinking about, I think also because, I told that story of as a child, people would scrunch up their face when they saw your lunchbox. And that's something that stays with you. Um, and I'm talking about the smells of lunches and things, which by the way, my food was delicious, but it made me not want that food,
Mm-hmm.
sadly. And that's something that really stayed with me. So I think that's also how I guess it got so deep with that. So it's a lot of the things around me. My next book is a satire on the education system. So it is very much what's happening in my world and what's around me. And I guess, again, I think some of that has been, well, a student has turned into this as an adult, like what made them do that? Yeah.
Mm. I love all of that, and
Thank
I
you.
now just want to run out and grab all your written work and
Oh,
read
thank
it.
you. You're beautiful.
Um,
Thank you.
uh, I am going to tell the listeners that there will be links in the show notes to wherever we can find your work.
Thank you.
And is that essay available for us to read?
Yes, so that's on SBS Voices. So if you just look up
Fantastic.
Samantha Lee, SBS Voices, it should be the first thing that comes up.
Excellent. Excellent. Um, tell me, I'm curious about going from teaching
Mhm.
English,
Yes.
to then writing for yourself. What have you drawn on from your career as a teacher, as an English teacher, to take into your creative work?
Yeah, really good question. No one's actually asked me that, so thank you. I think it's do you know, I think it's interesting because it made me realize, I think it's kind of almost gone the other way because it almost made me realize how much we limit creativity within an education setting. Um, Sadly, we are teaching to a very specific criteria and it has to match that. So at first, I think my writing really fell into that. But then I kind of was like, wait, this is just, writing for, because just, that's what I was taught. And so it made me kind of explore what else is out there. How do we make voice more interesting that's not just in this very, I guess, valued within one particular industry kind of way? And how do we branch out of that and I guess expand on that? So it's been, I think, good for that reason. But, I think that I had to kind of break free from that because at first I couldn't help but think back to a marking criteria, sadly. And it did make me quite sad for teaching as well because that's what we're all doing. Unfortunately, you are judged. I ran a faculty for almost a decade, and you are judged on your HSC results, and that's unfortunately how you kind of have to teach. And it's sad that I feel like, as well as that, I did also, I think once I started writing, I started to kind of become more aware of making the point that just so you know, like when we're marking, that doesn't mean that you've got bad writing. It just means that it's not necessarily for this particular criteria. You could actually go and write a bestseller, and it might not match this criteria, and that's absolutely fine. But you just need to think about your audience for this particular piece of writing, and that's something that I think about. Think about your audience.
So
Think about
you're thinking about your audience when you're writing.
a little bit now, I think, and more so now, actually. I think that the freedom with like a first novel is you don't think it's ever going to get published, right? I think the first novel is very special because you do have that creative freedom that you don't need to think about the audience. But I find myself much more aware of that now. And I think I became a lot more aware of it, once you sign the contract and then you're editing it and you're like, oh my gosh, what if this comes across as not what how I intended? For me, I'm very conscious of that, I didn't want to perpetuate stereotypes of Chinese culture. And my story starts with a horrific foot binding scene. Um, so in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm perpetuating these stereotypes of the barbaric nature of the East, all of that. And that made me panic. So unfortunately, that did make me a lot more conscious of the audience. But now I think of it more in terms of who do I actually want to read this? So with like my satire, I feel like that's got a more, I kind of want this to be quite valued among certain groups. So that's kind of more what I'm thinking, if that makes sense. Whereas I was kind of writing just complete freedom with bound.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess I wasn't necessarily thinking about audience because that was just like a pleasure project that I thought would never, I didn't think it would see the light of day.
Mm. And has that made it easier or harder in writing the second book?
Good question. I think that it's hard because I'm really in the early stages. I think in some ways a little bit easier. I think it's easier to plan the full picture, which is nice for me because I'm not a planner. But in terms of the actual writing itself, I don't think it's made much of a difference as yet. But I'm still, I'm in the first 5,000 words, so we're getting there.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well done on getting cracking with the next one.
Thank you.
I know a lot of people find it much harder once they have
Yeah.
one book out because
Yes.
suddenly you are thinking about audience
Yes.
and it's a different pressure.
Oh, completely. And, just in terms of my mind at the moment, I'm very much like pushing the book that I wrote that I'm not focusing on in my writing. And I keep getting drawn back into Bound, which, I love, but it's very hard to move on creatively when you're still talking about your last book.
Mm, mm. Um, do you like between the two, did you uh, get playful with some poetry or like is there other kind of things that helped you kind of create that separation?
That's a good point. I probably should have done that. I actually didn't do that because I think that I'd been working on Bound for so long, a decade. And interestingly, like the poetry and the essays kind of came up when I got to kind of sticking points in my novel. So when I was like, I just need a break. Let's do some of this. Or I'm so into parenting, I need to write about it. And then I feel like I feel like I'm being creative in, the publicity for my book, constantly thinking about how can I create engaging posts, like that kind of thing. So I feel like that's almost been a bit of a break. And I guess there was actually a break in writing during that time as well because I just was so busy and I just couldn't. And my daughter decided to not sleep through the night at that point as well. So yeah,
Hurrah.
just a break.
Oh, the joys of it.
Yes.
Um, can you please tell me if you were to be chatting with someone who is thinking about dipping their toe into creative writing, and maybe you've got your English teacher hat on with that or not, or the novelist hat on, or someone who's kind of at a stuck point
Hmm.
with it, with their creative work, what wisdom would you want to share with them?
I'd say just keep turning up. I think that you really just like that's all it takes. I think the difference between getting published and not potentially sometimes is that you're just consistent with it and that you can keep going and you don't stop and turn around. I'd say take a break. Like if you're stuck on something, take a break. Like maybe write something else. Focus on a different scene. I feel like sometimes it's the things. It's like the liminal time in a way you go on a run or you're in the shower or you're cooking dinner and then all of a sudden that idea comes. And sometimes it also comes when you're writing another scene as well. I feel like our brains are very powerful and that they work on things when we don't even realize it. And like it's pretty cool when you get that aha moment. And I certainly did with my novel when I was just like, I just need to tie it together more. And I don't even remember when or how that aha moment came, but certainly it was something that I had been thinking about nonstop, and I was definitely in the process of editing a different part of the novel. Um, and I think just thinking about the overall themes within your novel probably gets you to that point, maybe. And I guess the other thing is that without meaning to, actually, interestingly, with the aha moment for me, a scene that I ended up putting in, I didn't realize that I'd actually foreshadowed it the whole time from the very first draft, um, which is crazy. And I was like, how did I not think of this? I've hinted it the whole way through. And maybe that was why I realized it because I read a bit earlier and I'd seen it. I was like, oh, how did I not do that? So I think your brain works in mysterious ways, and sometimes you need to let it breathe, um, and sometimes working on a different part that gets you thinking about it without you even realizing it.
I love that. I love that so much. Um, it's almost like the trust the process, trust the
Yes,
brain.
you do. You
And
do need to trust the process.
yeah, because the brain, as you said, it's so powerful and
Yes,
we only utilize a small amount of it.
that's right.
What do you do to fill your creative cup?
Okay, so for me, like also, yeah, actually when I'm stuck as well, things that always help, and I don't have much time for it now with kids, but going to art galleries, or watching, incredible films or reading incredible books, I feel like they often stimulate these ideas. Art galleries in particular, I think it's about going to that physical space as well, and it's one of those things that with a movie, I find I'm on my phone constantly, or when I'm reading a book, I'm in and out of it. But I think that when you're in a gallery, I don't know what it is, but I just pay attention and focus. And often, like, I've had ideas for short stories in galleries. I've had ideas for parts of my novel in galleries and things like that. And even settings. Sometimes just looking at a picture can go, oh, I need to describe this. And I feel like also, sometimes it's, about journaling those little bits of description. They're not necessarily for your longer piece, but it's about keeping creative, keeping that mind active. And I feel like, taking a break, it does make it much harder to come back to. So often that inspiration, going to a gallery, watching something incredible and reflecting on it, you don't even need to do that creative bit that comes with it. Sometimes, like I used to, and I probably should go back to this, I used to actually journal about every single thing that I've read and seen. And reflect on it and think about how I could, what ideas could come out of it. And so I could just flick back to this journal and I'd have like post-it notes for all the ideas that I had. And if I was stuck, I could go back to one of those ideas.
That sounds like an amazing thing to do.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
this makes me literally want to go out and start doing that immediately because I do kind of reflect on every book I read, but
Yeah.
not always on the other things.
Yeah. And ideas really come from that. Like it was wonderful. Like I probably could go back now and still be like, oh, I've got all these other ideas that I forgot about. And I think as well as that often we have ideas that are so fleeting. You think about it when you're reading, watching, in a gallery, but you never pick it up again because it's gone within moments.
That's so true. Tell me, what does home feel like for you and your creative work?
Gosh, home. Sadly in front of my laptop. But yeah, I just think that, for me, the reason as well, 5 a.m., like 5 a.m. in front of my laptop on my sofa with a matcha latte. Um, I feel like you need these kind of prompts to kind of get you there straight away. And it becomes like the training. As soon as I smell it, it's time to write. As soon as I'm sitting in that spot in that corner, I've got to have the blind up so that I can look out and see the sunrise at some point. So I've got a sense of time as well. Um, but for me, I feel like I said it's fun in front of the computer, which is depressing, but I feel so at peace and at home in front of the computer at 5 a.m. with my matcha latte on the green sofa by the window. Like there's just something that's so sensorily fulfilling about that as well that just takes me where I need to be when I write.
I love that so much because it's actually there's a stacking thing that's happening in your brain that
Yeah.
means that when you do those things, you've created a ritual so your brain knows exactly what it needs to do when
Yeah.
you're sitting on the couch at that time of day with your matcha latte and your laptop, and your brain's like, great, we're here to write.
Yes, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until I was thinking about it the other day, and I was like, "Oh, hang on, this is like it's been drilled into me for years." And like also because I was like, I can't sit on my couch in that same spot and focus on something else on the computer, um,
Mm.
at a different time of the day. Like and I think that's why my writing is so good at that time. Like I actually do find it very hard to create extra writing blocks. That when I've got time, it's much harder to get in the zone for me. So maybe I
Yeah.
need a
I,
latte.
I was going to say, so does this mean that it's hard for you to write in other places as well?
I think actually that's a good question because it also depends on what part of the writing that I'm doing. I feel
Mhm.
like the editing process, I shouldn't be on the couch. Like I kind of need a bit more, like when it comes to doing a structural edit anyway. There are a couple of things I do. One of them is like the tactile, getting out the palm cards and shuffling things around, which I love. When I'm reading it in terms of like, I like to read a hard copy as well. So that can be on the couch. Um, so that can be fine. But I think that when I'm actually putting things into movement, for some reason, I like to be like at a table. So it can be my kitchen bench and it can be in my study, which is a complete mess. And I never use it for that reason, because it's chaotic, like my mind. Um, but I do think that the different stages changes where I need to be. In terms of writing in a cafe, I used to do that, but I think that's just like one more sticking point to get me out. Like, especially with kids, it just feels like it's one more thing to do to get there. And then I'll get
Yeah.
distracted by this and that and the other on the way. I'm gonna forget where to park, all of that. Like, it's just too much, too many steps,
Yeah.
for me to get there.
Yeah. And I love that you have this, you coming at it before anything else in the world has
Yes.
touched you at 5 a.m.
Yes.
Hopefully. Hopefully.
That's right. You know.
Oh yeah, I still remember when my three boys were young, and I don't think any of them slept past 5:30
Oh my
a.m.
goodness. See, I'm good.
So
I'm lucky. Mine sleep. Like I have to wake them generally to get them going for daycare and school. So that's quite nice. If they suddenly change their sleeping patterns though, I don't know what I'd do.
yeah. Thank you so much, Sam, for your time, and uh, all of the links to where people can find you will be in the show notes page.
Thank you so much, Meg. This has been such a wonderful conversation and it's just so nice to think about the actual creative process. Thank you.